Hi, my name is Day Owen, and I'm an organic farmer. I live in the coastal mountain range between Eugene and Florence. Actually, 3 years ago, I was a real estate man, and I retired out of the real estate business, and my wife and I moved to an organic farm, believing that we were moving to a natural paradise. And in fact, the place is gorgeous. We've got a river running through the property, a pond, 35 acres of absolute beauty. However, after we moved out here to paradise, we began hearing horror stories from our neighbors about the practice of timber industry aerial spraying by helicopter of pesticides. Now, these are herbicides, but the herbicides are classified by the Environmental Protection Agency under the category pesticides, so I'll refer to them as pesticides. Well, as we moved out here, we noticed there were an awful lot of clear cuts around us, and our neighbors began telling us that every time they clear cut the forest, they come in and spray poison, these pesticides, all over the mountain, because they don't want weeds to compete with the new seedlings that they plant after they've clear-cut the big trees. Now, their theory is that by spraying the poison, they're going to allow the new seedlings to get more sunlight because they won't have weeds competing with them. So that's their motive. However, it has been done in a much more environmentally benign way without using the poisons, and that term is manual release, in which you just have a crew of guys go out with chainsaws and weed eaters and keep the weeds down by the new seedlings, and that costs a little bit more money. Doing it without the poisons costs a little bit more money. So the timber industry, in order to save themselves a few dollars, spray poison, actually saturate poison all over the clear cut, and of course it runs down in the little mountain springs and gets into the salmon-bearing rivers, and it's in the air, it's in the soil. And worst of all, we discovered in talking to our neighbors that there is absolutely no legal buffer zone on how close a timber industry helicopter can be to your property line when they spray the herbicide, the pesticide. They can come right up to the property line, even if your child's bedroom window is several feet from that property line. They can be spraying these cancer-causing, as we went on to discover, cancer-causing herbicide pesticides. They can spray from the air by helicopter right next to your child's bedroom window, and there is no legal buffer zone. So as we began hearing these horror stories from our neighbors, including one family who's had 3 members of their family, including a small child, literally knocked unconscious and rushed to Sacred Heart Hospital by ambulance, 3 different members of their family have experienced that at different times, at different sprayings. Well, hearing these stories, my wife and I began to organize monthly meetings at our home where we invited the neighbors to come and share their personal stories, the experiences that their family has had with these herbicides. As we begin to collect these testimonies from folks who do believe that they've had family members stricken with cancer and other horrible problems, miscarriages and things like that related to the spraying of timber industry pesticide herbicides, we began to start contacting government officials and agencies looking for some help. And I have to tell you, the shocking thing and saddening thing is that it's now been almost a year and a half since we began this process, and even though we've contacted all of the government agencies that have to do with water, air, public safety, public health, et cetera, we haven't got a single government agency to even be willing to come out and interview or to even talk to any of the families who have been damaged or believe they have been damaged by the spraying of the herbicides and pesticides. The first government agency we contacted led to a shocking revelation, and that was the Oregon Department of Forestry known by the acronym ODF. So the ODF, the Oregon Department of Forestry, is the state agency that, on behalf of the public, regulates the activities of the private timber industry so as to protect the public health. Well, when we went and visited the offices of the ODF, the Oregon Department of Forestry, we immediately found that they had absolutely no interest in talking to people who believe they've been damaged by these herbicides. And in fact, they gave us the cold shoulder, and everything they said sounded conspicuously like exactly what the timber industry tells us. It sounded like it came out of the same book, in fact. Well, later we went on to find out it does come out of the same book. What the story is that the Oregon Department of Forestry, the state agency that's supposed to protect the public from the private timber industry, the ODF is controlled by something called the BOF. The BOF, that acronym stands for the Board of Forestry. That Board of Forestry is appointed by the governor, and historically, the Board of Forestry in Oregon usually consists of people that earn their private income from the timber industry. So you have a bunch of timber barons, timber industry guys, and professors from the College of Forestry who are making more money from being funded by the timber industry to do studies than they make from their salaries as professors at the College of Forestry. So in other words, they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from the private timber industry, and here they are on the Board of Forestry, which is the regulating board of the Oregon Department of Forestry, which is the public agency designed to protect us from the private timber industry. So in other words, to make that real simple for folks, what I've just said is that the public agency designed to protect us from the private timber industry is itself controlled by the private timber industry through the BOF, the Board of Forestry, which is really a bunch of private timber industry guys. So when we discovered that the chairperson of the Board of Forestry was a professor from Oregon State University from the College of Forestry, which is one of the parts of Oregon State University. They have a separate institution there called the College of Forestry. As we began to investigate the College of Forestry, we discovered that their wing at the College of Forestry that deals with herbicides, this type of pesticide that gets sprayed by the timber industry helicopters, we discovered that they have there something called, at the College of Forestry, the Vegetation Management Resource Council. Excuse me, that's Research Council. So it's Vegetation Management Research Cooperative, actually. That's what the letters stand for. Vegetation Management Research Cooperative. And that has exactly 3 financial backers, 3 sustaining members. And those 3 sustaining members of the Colleges of Forestry's Vegetation Management Research Cooperative are Dow Chemical, DuPont Chemical, and a big German chemical corporation called BASF. So here you have a situation where the public college, the College of Forestry, which is where all of these guys who end up getting forest credentials like bachelor's degree and go in college to be a forest worker, and then take even public jobs working for people like the Oregon Department of Forestry. These guys all have gone through the College of Forestry to get their degrees, and our research showed that the very textbooks, the very curriculum of the College of Forestry at this public university, Oregon State University, that the curriculum is itself written by, controlled by, the textbooks are written by the private timber industry and the private chemical corporations. So the timber industry and the chemical corporations actually really control the College of Forestry at Oregon State University. In fact, our research went on to show that the board of directors of the College of Forestry, in their founding documents, they have a rule that actually requires that a minimum and then the number is either, I believe it's 12, of their 15 board members, at least 12 of them are required to be private timber industry officials. So the very board of directors at the College of Forestry is required by their own rules to always have the vast majority of their members be private timber industry people. So the fact that a private, that a public university really has the private timber industry and chemical industry totally controlling the College of Forestry was actually a revelation to us. Again, as we continued our investigation, we found out that the professors that work at the College of Forestry, these are the guys that are getting paid huge sums of money. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars have gone into some of the pockets of these professors at the College of Forestry. They get paid this money to do studies to show whether or not the herbicides being sprayed by the timber industry are safe to the public. And all of the other things that have to do with timber policy for the state of Oregon, all of the questions that get decided by the studies that we always hear about in the media, we have to realize that those studies are coming out of the College of Forestry, and other College of Forestry in other states are the exact same thing. They're all controlled by the timber and chemical industries. So you have these professors at the College of Forestry in Corvallis who get paid, literally some of them have gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars by people like Weyerhaeuser and DuPont Chemical and Dow Chemical to do studies to decide whether or not the herbicides are safe for the public to be exposed to. And those professors know that if their study proves that the herbicides are not safe, that next year, when that company is doling out hundreds of thousands of dollars to do another study, they're not going to hire the professor who published a research paper doubting the safety of the herbicides. No, they're going to channel their hundreds of thousands of dollars to the professor who the previous year published a study saying that the herbicides are safe. So as we began to investigate, we found that the vice president of Columbia Helicopters, this is really important news right here, the vice president of Columbia Helicopters, and Columbia Helicopters is the company who is most involved in providing the helicopters on behalf of private timber industry clear cutting and the spraying of the herbicides and all of this. It's Columbia Helicopters. Well, Columbia Helicopters, their vice president gave a $1 million donation to the College of Forestry just before the dean of the College of Forestry lobbied government officials in order to increase the use of helicopter logging at the Biscuit Fire logging site that was very controversial in Southern Oregon a couple of years back. So you have a scenario there where Columbia Helicopters gives $1 million to the College of Forestry, and then the dean of College of Forestry lobbies on their behalf for increased use of the helicopters that are provided by Columbia Helicopters. And we begin to see that there's a vicious cycle going on, and that the government agencies that are designed to protect us, so far I described the Oregon Department of Forestry, and we see that even though it's supposed to protect the public from the private timber industry, in fact, its controlling agency is the Board of Forestry, which is really the private timber industry and chemical corporations. We then find out that the same is true for all the other regulating agencies in the state of Oregon. All of them are controlled by a board, and all of those boards are appointed by the governor. And historically in the state of Oregon, if you go back and study who the membership of all of those boards are and have been through the past decades, they're almost always controlled by the timber and chemical corporations. Right now, if you go to places like the Department of Environmental Quality, that's the DEQ, well, they also are controlled by a board. And on their board, when we investigated this past year, we found another professor from the College of Forestry on that board of the Department of Environmental Quality. And we found that that particular professor, over the past years, has had over $10 million of research money pass through his hands. And this is research money, again, coming mostly from the chemical and timber industry. And so then you have that man who's had all this money pass through his hands from those private companies being on the board that regulates the Department of Environmental Quality for the state of Oregon. And again, the scary thing is the DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality, supposedly is a public agency. So what we began to find with our research was that the public agencies that protect the public's health are really controlled by the private industry. So this was quite a shocking revelation, and as a matter of fact, when we saw that the public agencies weren't even interested in interviewing any of the people who have been knocked unconscious and rushed to the hospital after timber industry helicopter sprayings near our homes, when we saw that we couldn't get one person from even one government agency to come out and talk to anybody about it, we then turned to local politicians. Well, the local politician for our area was a state representative named Ann Morrison. When we went and visited her office, she had, and actually, so she wasn't our state representative at that time. She was our county commissioner. So when we went and visited her in her office, her walls of her office were decorated with anti-environmentalist, pro-timber industry bumper stickers and posters. The posters and bumper stickers were actually quite vicious in really making cruel jokes about environmentalists and such as that, and totally pro-timber industry decorations all over her walls. Well, we sat there and had a meeting with her and described our plight and found that she was, again, a spokesperson really for the private timber industry, even though she was our elected county commissioner. And then we researched and found out that her campaign for political office had been financed by the timber industry. We then did some research and found out that the timber industry and the chemical industry are the largest funders of political campaigns in the state of Oregon. Having discovered that, there was an election coming up, and we decided that we would support another candidate against her. And in fact, we successfully got her out of office, got a new county commissioner who was sympathetic to us elected, and then that county commissioner, and his name is Bill Fleener, he's a good man. Well, he then went to all the different government agencies that we'd been to try to find one of them that would take responsibility and would come out and interview the people who say they've been made sick by the timber industry spraying of these herbicides. And in fact, he couldn't get, a county commissioner, an elected county commissioner, could not get one single government agency to admit responsibility for this issue or to come out and interview the people who have been damaged or believe they've been damaged. So even he, as a county commissioner, wasn't able to get a response. Well, our state representative for this area, Representative Alan Brown, we went and visited him. And he was a Republican, and he listened to us, and he told us that even though he was personally sympathetic, that the leadership of his party would not support him getting involved in that kind of issue because the Republican Party is heavily financed by the timber industry in Oregon, and he himself, Representative Alan Brown, we researched him and found out that he was elected by timber industry money into his campaign. So we began to realize that not only are public agencies in the state of Oregon are really these boards that control the public agencies. But we found that the elected politicians, many of them are financed by the timber and chemical industries. We found out that in Salem, that if you wanted to get any laws changed, and what we want to see, just to let people know, is as a first step, we would like there to be a legal buffer zone, how close timber industry helicopters can aerial spray these pesticides right next to private homes and the bedroom windows of our children. So we would like that the science that's been done on how far these herbicides drift when they're sprayed by helicopters, some of the studies show that they easily drift 1 mile. We want some sort of buffer zone that protects us on how close they can spray the herbicide by helicopter next to our bedroom windows. And we got a state representative named Paul Holvey to actually write up a proposed bill that would have created a buffer zone, but it wasn't able to even make it to the floor because the committee it had to pass through to even get discussed is the Agricultural Committee at the state Senate. And unfortunately, the Agricultural Committee consists of politicians who are financed by the chemical industry. As a matter of fact, the Agricultural Committee is really controlled by an organization called, it sounds really good, an organization called Oregonians for Safe Food and Housing. Oregonians for Safe Food and Housing. I believe that's the official name. And what it really is a front group for the chemical companies and the timber industry, all the polluting corporations. They have this really nice-sounding political action committee, a PAC, Oregonians for Safe Food and Housing. Well, Oregonians for Safe Food and Housing, anytime there has been a statewide initiative that was going to get voted on by the people that had anything to do with the environment, Oregonians for, and actually the complete name is actually Oregonians for Safe Food and Shelter, I think, rather than housing. I think the last word is shelter. They have put in so much money into negative television commercials and radio advertising that they've been able to defeat all of the good environmental initiatives that we would like to see passed. They're able to squash simply by pumping millions of dollars into television and radio advertising. So you've got these same corporations controlling the political arena by financing political campaigns, and then controlling television and radio advertising every time there's an initiative that would do something to improve the environment. And anytime a bill is written by a state representative or a senator, they're right there at Salem heavily lobbying to squash it so that it never even comes to a vote. So the fact is having researched the state of Oregon and having realized that the whole system is actually wired to work against the people, we think the time has come for exposure. We want to expose the public to the fact that public health agencies like the Department of Environmental Quality and like the Board of Forestry or the Oregon Department of Forestry that's controlled by the Board of Forestry are really controlled by private interests. People don't know that. I've talked to reporters for the Register Guard newspaper. They didn't know that. I've talked to very well-educated people. I've talked to politicians. This is actually news to a lot of people, so the general public really doesn't know it. So we have seen that if we are going to get what we want, which the first step is a legal buffer zone on how close they can spray the pesticide by helicopter right next to our bedroom windows, if we hope to get a legal buffer zone, we realize that we've got to get the public aware of the incredible level of, I'll use the word, corruption in the state of Oregon, where you have the private chemical industries like DuPont and Dow Chemical actually controlling our public safety agencies like the Department of Environmental Quality and like the Oregon Department of Forestry. So we see we've got quite a battle ahead of us because they've got millions and millions of dollars. I mean, can you imagine how much money Dow Chemical has? Can you imagine how much money DuPont Chemical has? Having realized what we're up against, how totally wired the system is, how totally controlled it is by private industry, by the rich multinational chemical corporations really controlling what goes on in the state of Oregon, we've realized that our only hope of getting our legal buffer zone on how close they can spray the poisons to our bedroom windows is in public education and getting the people really aware of what's going on, the level of deep corruption in the state of Oregon. So we held a demonstration out here in the country, and we dubbed it the Pitchfork Rebellion. We took all our sheep and our cows and our chickens, and we went out on the highway since we're country folk, and we actually closed down the highway for a while. I sat down in front of a logging truck, and we got some media coverage for that, and then we were able to start having meetings with the governor's office and politicians and such as that. But we're in the very beginning stages, and what we need is for all people of goodwill, for all people that are shocked that our public health agencies are really controlled by private chemical corporations in the state of Oregon, to band together. So we're asking people to contact us at the Pitchfork Rebellion. The Pitchfork Rebellion, that name demonstrates the idea that we're country folk, and really, to just be frank, that we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore.